Welcome to the tutorial for Final Cut Pro's user interface and basic editing functions. We're going to start by opening up Final Cut Pro. It's found in your dock. Looks like a little camera slate. Select the icon. It'll take a moment to load, but I already had mine preloaded. So this is what the interface looks like in Final Cut Pro. You'll see three windows across the top, a long timeline window down at the bottom, and then some toolbars on the right hand side with your level meter. So one by one we're going to go through these. In the top left hand corner we have our browser. The browser, to highlight each of these windows you would have to click on them. So if I click on this window it'll highlight in a light gray. When that window is active, any key command that you're using will be only working in that window. And more on that later. So what I'm going to do is just discuss the two tabs that you'll see in the browser. These tabs are created when you start a new project file. So this project file that I have open is titled 122.12 EarthZoom, and if I wanted to start a new project file I'd say File, New Project, and now I have an untitled project and I would have to File, Save Project As in order to save it. And I'll save it in that same folder, but you would want to do proper file management, and that's covered in other tutorials. So we'll date it today, 2/16/12 project file, and then I would save it. So once you save it, it names the project file in that tab of the browser. But I'm going to go back to the other project because I have a couple files in it other than the sequence file. So you'll see that I have a couple different files here. There are video files, and I can tell that by looking at the icon, and then I have sequence files here, and you can tell that by looking at the icon. Now the differences between the two: video files are video. Sequences can be multiple clips of video edited together, and then you'll see sequences down here. So I currently have three sequences open. Two of them are named the same thing because they're from different project files, one here and one here. So I'm actually going to close this project. File, close project. So I only have my two tabs here. And sequences can be named if you single click on them and then single click on them a second time. And this would be, let's call this Final Timeline. And I spelled it wrong. And this one's going to be called Edit Timeline. And I have two different timelines, and you can see them down below, and they would be two different sequences that you edit together. And this would be an unedited sequence just put together for an export. Okay, so you'll see sequence files here, and here are video files. And if I was to grab one of these by the icon, because sometimes when you grab by the text it doesn't work, so I tell students to grab by the icon and drag to the timeline, you'll see it pop up on the timeline. Now there's two different arrows that you'll see here. If you are at the bottom of the track it'll be a down arrow. If you're at the top of the track it'll be a right arrow. So if I was to use the right arrow it would move whatever I'm putting down over, or insert edit it so that it moves whatever was on the track to the right, which in the direction of the arrow. So I'm going to undo that. Command Z is undo. Or if I was to bring it down to the timeline with a down arrow, and that's going to be at the bottom of the timeline track, it would place it and overwrite whatever files it was placed onto. So we don't want to do that either, so I'm going to undo that. And then if we want, we can add an audio file. So I will file import a file, or Command I import a file. And if I had an audio file here somewhere, well, I'll bring in a picture file. Here's a picture, a .jpeg. Choose it, and notice the icon is different. And you can see the extension. This is a JPEG and this is a video file. So if I was to bring this to the timeline, it gets placed on the timeline and it's just a picture file and doesn't move. So if you look up here, this won't move at all. It's not video, it's a picture. I'm going to delete that. And let's see if I can find some audio. File, import files, or Command I, and we'll go out of the Earthshots folder. And where would I have audio? Here's an audio file, and you can see the icon is different here. It just has a speaker next to it, so this is just audio. So that's the differences between the icons, and then you would drag this to the timeline, and this can go on the bottom track of the timeline. And that's where you'll see your audio tracks. Shift Z is a global zoom, zooms all the way out, and you see a video track, an audio track, and another audio track on the timeline. I'm going to delete that. So that's kind of the browser. You'll be importing files here, or when you log in, transfer or capture a video file will appear here. This tab here, the effects tab, gives you a list of all the different effects that you can apply to either videos, whether it's a transition or a filter or a generator, and you'll be using a generator to generate some text for your very first project, or you can have audio transitions or audio filters applied to your audio tracks. So we'll be using this tab a little bit later. So that's the browser. Second window over is your viewer window. The viewer window gives you controls for the files that you open in it. To open a file, you double click the file, and that'll open it in the viewer window. So if I double click a video file, it opens up the video file, and then I can look into filters. If I've applied a filter from the effects tab, they'll pop up here, or motion, and then motion can give you a lot of different controls. If I was working on this file, I could change its scale or its center point or any of the other controls here. So this viewer window is going to be where you control parameters about each of the files when you double click them, and more on that later. This window here is our canvas window. The canvas window shows you exactly what is going on in the timeline. So wherever this time bar is here, it'll be corresponding to what's going on in the timeline. So if I drag that back and forth, it'll also drag this back and forth, and I'll zoom in, Command plus to zoom in. Oop, I actually zoomed in on my canvas because it was active and not inactive. So I'm going to zoom back out, or global zoom, Shift Z, it takes me back to the top. I'm going to select my final timeline here and zoom in, Command plus zooms in, and now I can kind of see the whole scene here. And you can see if I jump around with the time bar here, it's going to correspond with the time bar here. And what we're going to do with that is see what's going on in time. So the canvas is kind of the viewer as to how you've edited your files in time on the timeline. This box here is your zoom box. This box here we usually leave in sync off, and then this box here, it gives you a bunch of options for showing your title safe areas and showing overlays. Image plus wireframe allows you to move the file around the timeline, just the image. It won't let you move the file, so if I was to click and drag, it won't move. Image plus wireframe, I can click and drag it and it'll move. Undo. Command Z is undo. Overlays will give you these boxes, and I like to leave overlays on especially when I'm working with text. So title safe. Title safe means the inside box gives you a guide as to where text should be on the screen. Anything on the outside of that box will be too close to the screen edge. So all of your text should be on the inside of that box, or title safe. Outside of that box, this is the screen safe box. So the second box is on most television screens, the standard definition television screen. If it's on the outside of that box, it will be cut off. And then our last window here is going to be our timeline. The timeline is where you're going to be editing sequences in time, and it works in layers. So if you see here, we have two different video layers, video layer 1 and video layer 2, and they work in a stacking order. So if I was to put video layer above it, it would be stacked so that you wouldn't be able to see what's underneath it unless it has transparency around it. Like this top layer here has transparency, and I would be able to see the S above that background layer, the earth zoom layer. And then this would be your audio track. Now if you move this line up and down, it'll show either more audio tracks or less audio tracks and more video tracks. So this is the separation bar between your video and your audio tracks. And over here is going to be our toolbars. Toolbar here, and then this is your audio bar here. It gives you your audio levels. In your toolbar, basic editing, A for arrow. So if I hit the A key, I can move, or I can click and drag the edges, very similar to Soundtrack Pro, or I can select multiple files by clicking and dragging. So I'm going to undo what I just did. B for blade, will blade tool and cut, and then A for arrow, I can arrange this in time if I wanted to on the timeline. And I'm going to undo that. Okay, Command Z is undo. That pretty much sums up all the tools that you'll need to get started with editing. So A for arrow, B for blade, and that'll give you the options to move around.